What if I helped you uncover one of the simplest ways to help you crush your behavioral answers in an interview? In this video, we are going to cover 3 common behavioral questions and help you understand something that I like to call the pivot point, because most candidates fail to identify this item. Specifically, the pivot point is when we hear the question, where should our actions start? Because oftentimes the additional context, additional actions that come before the pivot point are not answering the question, and this causes our interviewer to get bored, to shut down quickly, because we're not really answering what they asked of us, and we'll lose their attention. Remember, past performance predicts future performance, so we want to get into the actions that the question is trying to uncover as quickly as possible. Let's dive in. So item 1 is clarity. We need to take 4 simple steps before we get started. 1, we got to write the question down. 2, we need to ask for the question to be restated if it's not really clear, we didn't hear all of it, it's a longer question. 3rd, it's really good to restate the question just to make sure that you got it. And then 4 is to say something like, I'm going to take a minute to gather my thoughts. You are going to take your time. All of these items are critical. We need to make sure we're answering the right question. And then because we prepare our behavioral examples to cover everything, you prepare the whole story, oftentimes the question won't be asking for all those actions. But a lot of candidates, a lot of my clients dive in right away. They take less than a second to dive in. So taking your time can really help you understand the pivot point. Let's go into item 2, the setup. I want to go through this really briefly, but we need to talk about the situation and task. I want these items to be completed in 30 seconds or less. We're going to state our role and company. That's just for credibility purposes. Then the critical area is the next 2 sentences, where we're going to really detail the relevant people, processes, technologies, etc. And then we're just going to outline the task, which is simply going to be saying what we were tasked with and the timeline to do it. Now, getting back to those 2 sentences, the people, the process, the tech, they set the stage for the pivot point, and I will highlight this in all the examples that we cover today. So let's do it. Let's go into item 3, our example question. So question 1, tell me about a time you had a conflict and how you resolved it. This is a great question to start with because the pivot point is often misunderstood in conflict questions. Your interviewer doesn't actually care about how the conflict came up, but they really want to know how you resolved it. Why? Because the story of the conflict is not action-oriented. It's simply a story. So for these conflict questions, you're going to want to get to that resolution right away. So we'd set it up by saying something like, this is an example from my time as a program manager at Apple, focused in on new feature delivery for our Apple Watches. My colleague Bob, a product manager, did not agree with my timeline to launch a new heart rate feature on our Apple Watch Series 6. Let me tell you about the actions I took over a 1-month period to get this new feature launched. The first action I took was to schedule a one-on-one with Bob. In this example, we're 20 seconds in and we're right into the actions. I don't need to know your background with Bob and what led up to this stage. It's very clear. You want to release this new feature and Bob doesn't want to. Any additional information is just going to slow down your ability to get to that pivot point and start focusing in on the resolution items. Question 2. Tell me about a time when a program, project, or initiative you were working on was running behind schedule and the step or steps you took to get things back on track. Most interviewers, or in most interviews, you're going to get something about things not going right, things getting off track, and identifying the steps you took to correct what was going on. Now, we don't need to give all that background context of how things got off track, because it will really take away from the pivot point and getting into the steps we took to resolve it. So an answer might sound something like this. This is an example from my time as a sales account manager at Google, working with enterprise clients utilizing Google Ads. We were working to improve automation for our display campaigns, and we were seriously behind schedule on delivering these improvements to 3 critical enterprise customers that each had more than a $10 million yearly Google ad spend. Let me tell you how I partnered with both marketing and engineering to get things back on track in less than 1 quarter. The first action I took was to sit down with marketing to discuss communications. Again, this setup is very, very fast. In this example, we're into the actions in about 25 seconds or less. And all the other previous challenges or delays are irrelevant. The pivot point is getting things moving towards getting back on schedule or as close to on schedule as possible. So we start with those steps. Question 3, tell me about your greatest accomplishment. Similar to the other 2 questions, this is a very common question. And in many cases, this is the most difficult because we're going to have a lot of story behind it, and there's no clearly delineated pivot point. There's no word in the question that's clearly triggering towards a first action. So in order to do this, we really need to think about, okay, what's the pivot point that really was the precipice, this item that really got us towards moving towards that accomplishment? So for instance, this is an example from my time as a technical recruiter at Google, focused in on hiring program managers. Early on in my career at Google, I identified a few critical systems and processes that helped me deliver an awesome candidate experience for those interviewing at Google. And my goal was to share this process, share these systems with my recruiting colleagues by creating a global training to help them create the same experience. Let me tell you about the actions I took over the next 1-year period to make this goal a reality. The first action I took was to socialize a training that I created for my team of 20. So again, we're into these actions in less than 30 seconds. And the pivot point is really setting the tone for what I wanted to accomplish, meaning I'm starting with an action that took me in the right direction. I'm not going all the way back to the beginning. I'm starting with after creating that first initial training to grow on that, because those additional actions that came beforehand would just make the story really long. We got to pivot towards moving towards our greatest accomplishment. I know this is a lot of data. Really think about that pivot point, focus in on the keywords, and you'll do great. Good luck.